Alright, so it's been a minute since we've visited Eidolon with in the modern burn here. So Eidolon is a card that has been largely getting phased out. It's not seeing very much play. Maybe one out of every three lists that do well is playing Eidolon now, whereas Eidolon used to be an auto include. So we've been playing, in fact, the last several weeks lists have not included Eidolon. So I wanted to do a couple of leagues with Eidolon in different builds, and to see if this is a card that should maybe be revisited, maybe what matchups you want in and what matchups you don't, to kind of not necessarily finally decide the Eidolon debate, but kind of get a better balanced perspective on the card. Now, the rest of the list overall, obviously we're not going to have as many burn spells in the list when you have Eidolon back in the list. Other than that, you have your typical 20 lands, the 5 canopy lands, Swiftspear Goblin Guide, you have your core Lava Spike Lightning Bolt, Boros Charms, and then obviously Rift Bolt Skewer, and then your flex slots are Lightning Helixes, Skull Cracks, and to a certain extent the Eidolons these days. That said, we'll see how Eidolon feels in the matchups. Sideboard in this one was a little off the wall, but it was the one that I picked, the first one that I found that had Eidolons recently. 2-path, 4-palm. I've not been a huge fan of Deflecting Palm lately. In case if you hadn't noticed, most of the builds I've been playing lately don't include Deflecting Palm whatsoever. I've been opting for something like Sanctifier and Beck in this slot. But still, that's also a card worth revisiting potentially in a league. 3 Smash, 2 Wear Tear. There's been a slight uptick in Hardened Scales in addition to Hammer Time, as well as a deck like Hammer Time, that also decent against Amulet, the way Amulet's been built of late. Also, there's been an uptick in Leyline Sanctity with the uptick of Glimpse and Living End. So, it's not terrible to have answers to artifacts and enchantments in your sideboard. Third Skull Crack's a little bit random over the 4th copy of Whirling Vortex, especially since Vortex is good in so many matchups, primarily the Cascade matchups, but good against Control. Not that there's a lot of blue-white Control out there, and it could also be a card to potentially bring in against something like Creativity, although it is a little bit slow. So that said, that's basically the overview of the deck tech. Now, I know people don't really like deck techs, especially for a deck like Burn that gets played all the time, but it's kind of the rundown the list, why we're playing it, why we're revisiting Eidolon, and we'll see how it does in some league gameplay. Alright, we're back with a little bit of Eidolon Burn here. Taking a look at our opening hand in the first match. Pretty solid, reasonable hand. Only downside, no 1-drop creatures, but we do have either a Rift Bolt or Lava Spike to play on 1, Eidolon on 2. So, goes Scalding Turn, pass. We suspend Rift Bolt and pass. And it fetches Stomping Ground, so likely Rhinos at this point. Nope, we are up against Glimpse combo. Go ahead and Rift Bolt their face. Here, we did have 2 options. We could have gone Swiftspear plus Lava Spike, but I think Eidolon is the best course of action, especially if our opponent has a multiple Glimpse turn, and for some reason they don't have a Fury to answer this. So our opponent does, in fact, have a Fury, and they are on the Omnath Locus of Rage variant. They play Season Pyro and pass. So a little bit more of a fair game. Apparently they didn't have a Cascader onto, or they were just trying to get more permanents in play. We go ahead and attack. They block. So opponent goes to Violent Outburst. Hit a Glimpse into not the most impressive of things, although they do still manage to deal with most of our board. Looks like they're going to go again. They do. This time hitting a bunch of creatures, but they're still just dead to burn spells. So, pass the turn. Cast Boros Charm. We cast Lava Spike, and they are dead. Alright, back for game number 2. Looking at our sideboarding options. Probably should have brought in the Wear Tears, knowing that one of their best defenses against us is Leyline Sanctity. Instead, we brought in the Roiling Vortexes and boarded out the Searing Blazes. So, taking a look at the opening hand, 2 creatures, 4 lands. Could argue keeping this hand, but didn't have a lot of upside, but does get blown out by 1 Fury. This hand's kind of similar to our 7-card hand, except obviously we're going to be down on resources. Probably our best bet here is Swiftspear, Eidolon, Reveler, hold 2 lands, and then ditch these 2, which is what I do. One of the things you always have to remember when you're playing Eidolon is to try to manage how much damage you take, especially from your lands, so the canopy lands are a little bit worse. Opponent's going to have Wave Sifter on 2, just building up their permanents for a large glimpse potentially here. Opponent goes and casts a Shardless Agent. Eidolon hits them for 4. They unfortunately get Leyline of Sanctity and are now able to blank our creatures. They have a Fury, deal with our creatures, and at that point, there's no way we can really win this game, especially without Wear Tear in our deck. Our opponent just has enough creatures to blank our creatures plus pressure us, and Leyline of Sanctity just simply effectively ends the game. So, opponent just takes this. They go ahead and swing, realizing that they're going to win this race because we'd have to damage ourselves, and they have Fable as another blocker. And that's it for game 2. We made a tiny adjustment for game 3. We brought in the Wear Terrors, cut a couple Rift Bolts. Rift Bolt's a little bit awkward, especially in the face of boarding in Roiling Vortex. So Sand's potentially keepable, but you know, we have to remind ourselves that a card like Leyline of Sanctity could easily ruin our day, and it's 4 lands, so I think this is a mulligan. And apparently I keep this hand. Okay, well, probably should have mulliganed this hand in retrospect, especially since our creatures aren't guaranteed to do a ton of damage. Go ahead, and they have a Violent Outburst, so if they hit land drops, basically they're going to be able to combo no matter what. We get to draw. We draw Eidolon here, so fortunately they have Fury, so I choose not to play Eidolon here in the face of likely getting Furied. Looks like our opponent might Violent Outburst in response to Fury here. It's a trick that you pick up with the Glimpse deck just to increase the number of permanents, and maybe we'll get lucky and they'll flip away this Leyline of Sanctity, and maybe we can get in some damage, hence why main reason why I haven't conceded. And then they just flip into another Leyline, an Omnath. It's going to make a bunch of big dumb idiots, and at this point we have no prayer of winning against, you know, 4 5/5s in play, and if they die, we take 3 damage. So, and that unfortunately is the way things swing sometimes, especially when your opponent has what's arguably the best sideboard card in Modern against your deck in Leyline of Sanctity. Now, it doesn't single-handedly win the game. A lot of times decks that play this are combo decks, so, you know, used to be historically decks like Ignasium, decks like Living End, etc. Now, those matchups are already, you could already potentially lose, and then when you throw in a card like that, it makes winning game 1 imperative, and then hoping to steal one of game 2 or game 3. As far as the positioning of Eidolon in our deck, obviously Eidolon itself is very good against Glimpse combo, especially when they try to go a bunch of different, you know, glimpses in one turn. They're taking 4 damage a crack. The downside is they're more vulnerable to Fury, so on the balance, I think Eidolon's better in this matchup than not having it, but obviously Fury kind of mitigates some of the power of the card used to have. Alright, back for our second match. We are on the play, fortunately. We take a look at an opening hand that is pretty good as long as Searing Blaze has a target. We have 3 lands, a Goblin Guide, some early burn spells, so let's mulligan to 6. just to potentially play the basic here, but since we have the second fetch land, so we are up against Creativity. Lightning Bolt on top, we play Eidolon. So this is one of the matchups where Eidolon is relatively decent in the early turns, just because the opponent really struggles to deal with it. Well, not struggles to deal with it, but they take damage to deal with it. So you have to be very careful of playing around something like Spell Pierce here. Opponent makes a dude. Go ahead and Searing Blaze it, and they're just dead. So got a little bit lucky here, but this is a matchup. All comes down to, can they get an Archon in play? If they don't ever get an Archon in play, generally Burn is pretty favored. If they get an Archon into play, Burn has a very tough time winning after that. Obviously, cards like Skullcrack and Inspire, or not, a Roiling Vortex can kind of mitigate the life gain a little bit, but if they ever live long enough and get an Archon into play, chances are you're not winning the game. Alright, looking at game number 2 as far as sideboarding. Doesn't look like we brought in anything, honestly. So, just present the same 60. Now, Searing Blaze isn't great in the matchup, but there is enough things to hit. You have the Dwarf tokens, you have Fable tokens, you have the back end of Fable. You could potentially bring in something like Smash to Smithereens for treasures and such, but that is a bit meh, especially when you're just trying to win before the Archon comes down most of the time. Or sometimes you have to tempo them out, just depending. Swizzle Spear here. You know, they have two turn 1 interaction spells. One is Bolt, one is Spell Pierce, so you know, chances that one of these die are pretty high. Now, if they had a Creativity here, we would have been in a world of trouble, but fortunately they did not. So you just Rift Bolt, kill their dude, play a land, attack in. Got to be mindful of the card Spell Pierce here, which is why I didn't play Searing Blaze. Which, especially since the way they've been playing this game, it feels like that's a card that they're trying to keep open as much as possible. They pitch an Archon. If they have Persist, we're in trouble. Instead, they just have another Fable. Next turn, we're going to be able to Searing Blaze around a Spell Pierce. So, and then just absolutely throttle them. They'll get to chump block one thing. If they want, they have a run-in 6 on top, which means it's unlikely you're going to be able to Creativity us. Now, obviously, they do get to draw 2 deeper than the run-in 6. And if they had found a Creativity, we just bolt them, put them to 1 here. Our opponent bolts in response. We Skullcrack in response. This way, if they have to cast spells, they just take damage from Eidolon. And this, I think, is one of the better matchups for Eidolon. Now, obviously, they have access to Leyline Binding, which is just a hard counter to Eidolon, but they already have quite a bit of things they have to take out with the presence of Goblin Guide and Swift Spear. So, you know, they obviously have Prismatic Ending, Bolt, and Leyline to answer creatures and permanent-based hate. So, but, you know, this was one case where they never drew to Leyline Binding, and Eidolon looked pretty good overall in this matchup. Now, that said, it's not usually a great top deck after the first or second turn, so, once again, another argument against Eidolon being in the deck, but, you know, in terms of the matchup overall, I think it's a pretty reasonable card to be in the matchup. Alright, match number 3. Did the die roll this time, which is nice. This hand's a bit of a gamble, especially on the play. We can't cast these 2 The double Goblin guy does make this probably worth keeping. But once again, it is a bit of a gamble if we don't hit a second land drop. Copperline Gorge, Hardened Scales. Okay. Definitely a deck you want to get your early creature beats in when you can, as once they start clogging the board, this can be kind of a nightmare matchup. And this is one of those matchups where Eidolon is quite bad, especially as the turns go on, as they can often play around Eidolon, and just the fact that, you know, our opponent's just making this absurdly large automaton that we can't target, and you know, turn 3 and they have a 15/15 in play. While it can be chumped, just a terrible thing overall. So, on game 2. So we have a ton of cards to bring in this matchup because of this particular build. We have the Smashes, we have the Wear Tears, we have Deflecting Palms. As far as cards to board out, we have Eidolons, and we also have Pass to bring in, so we have a ton of cards to bring in. Eidolons go out because, like I said, they can kind of play around Eidolon, and it's not the best card in creature-based matchups, especially on the draw. I guess we're on the play this game, but especially on the draw, it's bad. And then Searing Blaze is kind of middling in the matchup, but we do keep in a couple copies. Generally, their best cards against us these days. Traditionally, it was always Nature's Claim, and then in more recent times, they have been bringing in copies of Chalice of the Void. It's a deck that I've lost to quite a bit of late whenever I've played it with Burn. Just feels like a bad matchup the way they're currently structured, and I think historically it was always a close matchup, much like Affinity, with maybe Burn just a tiny bit behind depending on the draws. So turn 1, Swizzle Spear, go. Welding Jar, not the most impressive start for our opponent. Opponent does sack that, so maybe I wasn't supposed to waste the Smash to Smithereens, but we do get in a little bit of damage. Opponent has a very slow start for them, so they play Chalice on 1. We go ahead and smash the Chalice. And like I said, the opponent had a very, very slow start this game compared to last game when they just make this huge dumb idiot. They have Chalice on 1, so if we draw a land, this is going to get quite ugly for them. We fuse a Wear Tear, blow up their Chalice, blow up their Urza's Saga. And this just feels like one of those games that we should win pretty easily, especially if their only play here is Zabaz. So, opponent chooses not to block. Lightning Helix, put them to 3, and now any burn spell will be lethal. Ravager hits for 2. We swing in, they block, we Skull Crack, and they don't have a Nature's Claim, so they just lose. Alright, match 3. Can we finally pick up a win in a match against Hardened Scales? All Burnt Hand, a little bit risky, but creatures really diminish in value beyond turn 2 in this matchup, so especially if they have like a Hangerback Walker or something. So as long as we can effectively play around Chalice, we should be good. Now if they have a Chalice on 1, obviously we lose 2 cards in our hand, and it gets really bad. They have Patchwork Automaton and Welding Jar. Once again, we just want to get these spells out of our hand. The biggest concern here is the giant Patchwork Automaton getting a Shadow Spear equipped to it, but I think with the Skull Crack we'll be able to manage that and do enough damage to kill them. So opponent's at 11. We currently have 10 points of burn in hand, which means we still need to top deck at least 1 more point of damage and potentially a way to deal with this Patchwork Automaton next turn if we don't draw burn spells. So Skull Crack, go. Bolt, go. So if we draw anything here, we draw a Searing Blaze, which is basically perfect, especially since they played the Hammerback Walker, and we were just able to finish them off. So As far as the early count of the first 3 matches of this league, Glimpse, Eidolon overall net positive. Creativity overall, Eidolon net positive. Hardened Scales overall, Eidolon probably a net negative. A card going to board out in that matchup. So far 2 matchups where we would like to have Eidolon, 1 where we wouldn't. Just something to keep and consider as we're moving along. That's going to be it for this video. The next video that will be coming out will be the final 2 matches of this league and a little bit more of a rundown on thoughts on Eidolon. So, if you like Modern Burn content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe here for MTG Nexus Red.